Hello and welcome to this astrological forecast for December 2024. In this video, I'm going to first present a brief overview of the month. Then we are going to pull up some charts and look at things in more detail. And finally, at the end, I'll have some concluding remarks to make. I initially wanted to do this as a live stream, but due to unexpected anomalies, I am having to do it as a pre-recorded video instead. So without further ado, let us begin. My first impression of this month is that it is going to be one where things are shifting around. They're not exactly moving forward very much because we still have the Mercury retrograde, and then we have Jupiter continuing to retrograde back into its square with Saturn. And in addition to those shifts, we also have Mars stationing retrograde. So there's a lot of returning to what has been, to reassess it and rethink it. As we're starting out the month, we're right in the early to beginning phases of the Mercury retrograde, which is often when it is at its most intense. And so whether we like it or not, we're not quite moving forward yet. There are indeed, however, many and numerous interesting developments along the way, and that is what we are going to look at in some detail in this video. I'm trying to balance giving a thorough overview with not giving so much detail that you become lost in the details and unable to discern or determine what the month is really essentially about. So hopefully I've struck the right balance and we can get into that now. On December 1st, we have the new moon in Sagittarius. So it is a new month with a new moon. And if we zero in on it here, you can see that this new moon is starting right as the month itself is officially beginning, at least in the Eastern time zone. As you can see up here in the corner, we're in Eastern Standard Time now, so adjust your time zone accordingly. But the interesting thing with this new moon in Sagittarius is that even though it has this optimistic, forward-looking, eyes on the horizon energy of Sagittarius, and indeed it does, it is also square to Saturn. So you can see right here, there's this implication or suggestion that despite the optimism of this new cycle that we're entering into, there's also this theme of having to deal with or bump up against authority, structure, limitation, or hard realities as indicated by the square to Saturn in Pisces. The new moon is like a seed that is planted that will grow over a period of the next few weeks and culminate at the full moon and then begin to recede on some level until the following new moon. So this really sets the tone for the month. And just like with November, we had a new moon right on the first of the month. It's strangely convenient. This happens every once in a while. We have a new moon again here on the first of this month of December. It's a fitting opening for a video like this where we can examine that which sets the tone for the entirety of the month, or at least until the next new moon, which isn't until the very end of the month. So basically what this suggests then is that the background mood of this month is one of optimism and forward looking, bumping up against delays and limitations and hard realities. That is a background theme for this month. Now, it is also interesting to note that this new moon is trine Mars in Leo within a few degrees, as you can see right here. And so there's something about this breakthrough in action or motivation, in pushing forward, in belief and vision, those being both things I would associate with fire signs, but also with the sign of Sagittarius in particular. But notice here that Mars is in fire sign Leo, ruled by the sun currently in Sagittarius. Sun-Moon conjunction forming the new moon. So we have a Saturn-Mars activation here, a bit of an unusual one with a stressful square to Saturn and a smooth trine to Mars, but I expect this will create a background mood of this theme or idea that we see from time to time of needing to balance pushing forward with holding back. So that trine to Mars wants to push forward with action, but Saturn is saying, no, we need to slow down and not move too quickly. And I think that balancing act is very much indeed going to be part of this month, especially with the Jupiter Saturn square occurring again later this month as Jupiter retrogrades back into that square with Saturn. And we'll be exploring all of that later as well. On December 2nd, we have Venus trine Uranus and Mercury trine Chiron. So interesting that these two developments are occurring on the same day. Venus trine Uranus, first of all, is like a breakthrough, a sudden, possibly liberating breakthrough involving our relationships, feelings, or desires. It can be a very exciting and enticing time. However, it's also interesting then that we have that Mercury trine to Chiron at the same time, which usually represents a healing breakthrough for the mind, or talking about our unhealed wounds in such a way that is healing and therapeutic to them. And we should also note that Mercury, of course, made this trine to Chiron a while back. And if I just animate the chart here, you can see when Mercury was direct. So it looks like on about November 19th, like earlier in the day on November 19th, Mercury perfectly trined Chiron. And so as we get back to that here on December 2nd, this is a return to that theme in some way. Now, it is the retrograde hit, which is going to imply that it's a more internalized manifestation of this energy. In other words, don't expect this to be a more loud and out in the open type of event. Instead, it's much more internal and much more reflective on what has occurred. However, when we then get to the third and final trine, which we'll just fast forward here a bit to that, still quite a bit away, but let's see. Is it on the 31st? Yes, on December 31st, you can see by January 1st it is perfected. So in the early hours of December 31st, this Mercury Chiron trine will perfect again. And so we will see the third and final part of this, the third and final act of this play or this development. On December 5th, we have the Mercury Cazimi, also known as the Sun-Mercury conjunction. So this is a very key part of the retrograde. And if we move forward a bit here, you can see that right around, it was like during the minute of 9:17 p.m., if you really want to be that exact, that's when it perfects. But just know that the whole day of December 5th is going to be quite significant in terms of the Mercury retrograde theme that we've been experiencing. Now, there's a number of things I want to say about this. So I've often talked in the past about how I don't generally worry too much about Mercury retrogrades in the way that most other people do, and I still affirm that here. However, I do want to point out one thing that I forgot to mention in my November forecast, and that is that if we back up to about the time that Mercury stationed retrograde, there we go, we'll just look at it right there. You can see, if you notice, if you look very closely, it's actually stationing, or it actually stationed closely square the Saturn-Neptune midpoint. That'd be at roughly 20 degrees of Pisces, and Mercury at 22 Sagittarius 40. And so The interesting thing then about this whole Mercury retrograde that we've been experiencing and will continue to experience for so much of this month is the idea of the stress of discerning reality from illusion, the difficulty in determining what is real, which would be Saturn, from what is not real, which would be Neptune. So discerning reality from illusion, very much a big part of this Mercury retrograde. Now, returning to the cazimi on December 5th. At this point, however, you notice here that this conjunction, Sun-Mercury conjunction, is very closely square to Saturn. So we have, on the one hand, the Sun-Mercury cazimi itself being a day where the theme of this Mercury retrograde is going to be is going to show up in a very pronounced way. But on the other hand, at the time of the conjunction, of the aligning of Mercury with the Sun from Earth's perspective, we have this square to Saturn, as if to say the stress of hard realities is going to be particularly felt. But as if that is not enough, there is even more to the story than that. So you can also see here that the conjunction is opposite Jupiter in Gemini. So looking at that on its own, it's like saying, okay, there's something about how our minds are being challenged to expand or grow in ways that may be difficult, that is particularly pronounced at this time or on this day, December 5th. But there's also then this whole activation of this aspect pattern, the square to Saturn and the opposition to Jupiter, and in fact forming a T-square, that is activating the ongoing, larger, more long-term aspect of the Jupiter-Saturn square, which has to do with the ways in which we are expanding or growing in one area of our lives that is bumping up against limitations in other areas of our lives. So the expansion and growth represented by Jupiter, the limitations represented by Saturn. So that's all being triggered by this Mercury cazimi on December 5th. And that tells me that December 5th is going to be a exemplary of what so much of not just the beginning of this month is all about, but even perhaps the longer term Jupiter-Saturn square, or at the very least, the longer term Jupiter-Saturn square is making its way into the Mercury retrograde theme that we have early this month. So it's very interesting. And altogether, again, this, I'm trying to keep this as simple as possible for those who maybe can't understand or aren't as up to speed with the more technical astrological terminology. This is basically like being pushed to grow or increase or become something more in ways that are not only challenging, but that are bumping up against the status quo or limitations or whatever. It's like dealing with challenges involving growth, and even the idea of uncontrolled growth or the potential danger of uncontrolled growth, something that is expanding and becoming more and more and more to the point that it may threaten the overall stability of things, and then that has to be kept in check somehow with Saturn. So this is all interconnected, okay? And that's the point I'm wanting to make here. So I would say also, don't be surprised if something manifests on December 5th that is representative of this longer term cycle. The good news, no matter what happens, is that after we get past this part of the Mercury retrograde, which is the halfway point, the more challenging and stress-inducing aspects of the Mercury retrograde will tend to diminish. Oh, and then one other thing I can mention actually about the Mercury cazimi is that at the time that it happens, the moon here in Aquarius is moving into a sextile to it, while also applying to a trine to Jupiter. So placing the moon at the release point of the Mercury Sun to Jupiter opposition, and basically suggesting that at this time it is through our ability to remain intellectually detached and observe things in a more objective and calm and focused manner that our minds will meet more effectively the challenge to expand or grow, as indicated by the opposition from Mercury to Jupiter in particular at the time of the Cazimi. On December 6th, Mars stations retrograde. So you can see Mars is here at 6 degrees of Leo, and it stations retrograde still in kind of a wide but still relevant opposition to Pluto that is now on axis again since Pluto's return to Aquarius. So this is, of course, part of a longer term cycle. We've been building up to this Mars retrograde for many weeks or a couple of months now. And the opposition to Pluto in particular must be talked about because it is extremely relevant to this Mars retrograde. And that has to do with stirring up our fears or insecurities or anger at what is deep, dark, hidden, and powerful. So Mars is the angry planet. It's what we fight for and what motivates us. Pluto is deep, dark, hidden fears and power structures, especially that which is both hidden and powerful, the hidden power structures. And so when Mars moves into an opposition with that, that's like saying that the part of us that is angry and wants to fight is challenged or maybe even feels threatened by something deep, dark, hidden, and powerful. And so this can stir up all kinds of things on both an individual and collective level. Now understand that it's not necessarily that some great big event is going to manifest on December 6th specifically, though it may, but that this is a very significant and important turning point in this larger cycle that we've been experiencing. So let's just animate the chart here a bit. So you can see we go back a couple months. By early September, we first had Mars into Cancer. And then, I believe it was right about this point in early October that it entered its pre-retrograde shadow. So things started ramping up then in terms of these themes of this Mars retrograde. And by November 6th, it was in Leo, and now here on December 6th, it is stationing retrograde. Now, it's not going to be done with this whole process until basically the month of May. You can see by May 6th, it has only just a little bit before that left its post-retrograde shadow, and then it won't even be out of Leo until it looks like mid-June. So this is a very long-term process, and that's the point I'm wanting to make here. So keep that in perspective. This is, while yes, very much about December as Mars stations retrograde early this month, it is also about a period of time that extends beyond December. I would also point out that for anyone who has personal planets or other sensitive points around 6 degrees of the fixed signs, so Leo, Scorpio, Aquarius, Taurus, Mars retrograde station at this time is very likely to stir things up for you personally in the areas indicated by those personal planets or other sensitive points. And it should also be pointed out that in general, this retrograde station, like all retrograde stations, represents at least a temporary intensification of these themes, the stirring up of our anger or fear of what is deep, dark, hidden, and powerful. So be aware of that. Also be aware that the fact that Mars is retrograding in this area of the zodiac, with or without the opposition to Pluto, I'd be saying this can also represent just a period of time where there is heightened energy output and activity in these areas. And in particular, this one would represent two or more areas for most people because it is taking place in both the signs of Cancer and Leo. Mars has moved into Leo, and it is from that point at which it stations retrogrades back into Cancer, and then stations direct and eventually makes its way back into Leo. And so there's this connecting of two different areas of one's life, depending on where that falls in an individual's chart. And so, like, if you use the whole sign house system that I prefer to use, you would look at what house overlaps with the sign of Leo and what house overlaps with the sign of Cancer to determine those connected areas. On December 7th, boy oh boy, dear viewers, do we have some events here. We have Venus into Aquarius, conjunct Pluto, the Sun opposite Jupiter, and Neptune stations direct, all on the same day. So December 7th, and this is right after Mars had just stationed retrograde, December 6th and 7th is quite the significant turning point. And so let's go over that. First of all, Venus ingress into Aquarius is quite significant, and let's zero in on the exact time of that here. So soon after 1 a.m., that takes place, and then Venus immediately becomes both co-present with and conjunct Pluto, with the exact conjunction to Pluto occurring around 9 a.m. Okay, so what does this imply? Well, first of all, this concludes Venus time in Capricorn, which ends about a month-long chapter involving our relationships, feelings, and desires. But then the conjunction to Pluto, it's almost like the grand finale of that or something, because this is a great intensification of our feelings, relationships, or desires, at least for this one day of December 7th. And the entrance into Aquarius implies a certain level of intellectual detachment when it comes to these things, expressing affection in ways that are unique, unusual, different. But the conjunction to Pluto, this can be like, even, well, whether it's in Aquarius or any sign, I would say just deep and intense passion, whether in a relationship context or almost any other context, but especially having to do with connecting with others, having to do with creativity, beauty, aesthetic appeal, all of these Venusian significations. This is really intense stuff. And it's interesting that it occurs in a trine, a pretty close trine with the South Node, which suggests there may be something about fairly suddenly releasing or letting go of something having to do with relationships. Maybe even, well, let's be honest, Pluto does often signify one's trauma, maybe even somehow releasing or letting go of past relationship trauma and having a sort of breakthrough occurring with that. And I would even go so far as to say that, first of all, the fact that it's taking place in Aquarius would help one to gain a certain level of objective perspective on the situation to be able to let go of such past relationship trauma. And second of all, we look at the ruler of Aquarius right now, Saturn in Pisces, which is also very much an energy of letting go of things. And, you know, Pisces really in particular being about this spiritual realization of the need for forgiveness. And it's almost like you're done fighting in the way that, especially in a way that the following sign Aries would, but you're done fighting in the way that you might be accustomed to, and you're ready to just let go, and recognizing the need to be able to let go of things and surrender. So it's a very interesting interplay of energies on this day, and we're not even to the subsequent major developments on it yet. And to amp that up even more, you'll notice that the moon is even here in Pisces at 4 degrees by 12 p.m. So early in the morning, departs Aquarius and enters Pisces. So very interesting indeed. I'd also point out with the Venus-Pluto in particular that, of course, you're likely to feel this building up for a couple of days and up to a couple of days after. And it's worth mentioning real quick, if we just animate the chart, let's go to midnight, December 5th. Yeah, so like late on December 4th, early December 5th, the moon is right there with this Venus-Pluto conjunction, activating it at that time as well. And so, I'm trying to keep this as brief and simple as possible, but I just want people to be as aware of what's actually happening as possible. The moon basically in the evening of December 4th and like later into the night is activating that Venus-Pluto early, and then we see it more powerfully as we get into December 7th, and it perfects that day. Now, we also today have the Sun opposite Jupiter, which you can see right here. So again, anytime you have an opposition to Jupiter, there is this idea of being challenged to expand or grow in ways that may be difficult. And the sun represents our conscious awareness, our sense of self, and very often the ego. So you could say like, this is a day where who we are and our sense of self-identity is indeed challenged to expand or grow in ways that may be difficult. This can also be fortunate, though, with Jupiter's benefic quality. But again, the opposition is like, okay, you are being pushed by something out there, by something outside of you to grow, to increase in some way, or to maybe even gain knowledge of the bigger picture. These are both Jupiterian themes, and also they are Sagittarian themes with the sun here in Sagittarius with Jupiter in Gemini ruled by Mercury. And so we have that mutual reception between Mercury and Jupiter, which I forgot to mention earlier, that is quite fortunate at this time because it makes these Mercury-Jupiter themes a bit easier to deal with. And then finally, of course, on this day, we also have Neptune stationing direct. And if we animate the chart, you can see that by 7 p.m. Eastern Time, Neptune is direct in Pisces. And so Neptune stationing direct implies this sense of moving forward when it comes to our spirituality, beliefs, creativity, faith, our ability to surrender and let go, especially with Neptune and Pisces. These are all themes associated with that. Of course, Neptune can also be confusion and illusion in a more negative sense. It can represent illnesses at times and all that is hidden. I don't so much expect this to be the most obvious event that day, especially with everything else that's going on. But just know that on a larger, longer term scale or framework, there is now this shift in the background having to do with these illusory Neptunian things where we are beginning to move forward again in this area. And Neptune also is about to finish up its time in Pisces before too long. Next year in 2025, it will finally, after all these years, after more than a decade in Pisces, it will finally move into Aries just a little bit, and then retrograde back into Pisces and then back into Aries in 2026. So, but the point being that Neptune is really getting very close now to finishing up its time in Pisces. So, we're gearing up for a shift. I would suspect that many other people can feel it, that, things are really about to change. I know I can certainly feel it, and the astrology reflects it very much so. And we will, of course, get into that more in 2025. But I'll just say right now, 2025 is going to be a year of great change that many astrologers have been looking at for quite some time now, because we have so many planets, outer planets, changing signs. And so we'll get into more of that next year. On December 12th, we have Venus opposite Mars. So this is always a very playful and fun aspect usually. This is like saying the part of us that wants to connect with others, Venus, is being challenged by the part of us that wants to fight and push forward, Mars. But really, Venus and Mars are the cosmic lovers, and so this can be very fun and playful energy, whether in a relationship context or not. It's very creative energy. I usually see this type of aspect whenever something rather, how do I put it? When something spicy is stirred up, is perhaps the best way to describe it. And it's interesting that it's happening just on the heels of the Venus-Pluto conjunction, and this might even stir up some of that again. But rather than being so deep and dark and intense, this looks like something more fun and playful, and mixing that in with the passion of it. Now, it's also very interesting to note that Venus is sextile Mercury at the same time, with that Mercury trine Mars. And that suggests that with that placing Mercury at the release point of the Venus-Mars opposition, that it is through our mind, communication, and perhaps travel that our feelings, desires, or relationships will meet more effectively the challenge of assertion, aggression, action, motivation, Mars. So I hope you followed all of that. In other words, with Mercury here at the release point, that gives us a way to much more easily work with the energy, whereas otherwise it might be a little more difficult. And again, it's going to be through our mind, mental activity, reading, writing, studying, talking, and even travel as well, that we will more effectively handle the intensity of this energy. And I would also say, don't be surprised if something having to do with the Mars retrograde theme is stirred up this day. On December 15th, we have the full moon in Gemini, and we also have Mercury stationing direct. And so let's look at one thing at a time here. I'm going to back this up to about when the full moon takes place. Okay, so just a little bit further. Okay, so just after 4 a.m. Eastern time, the full moon in Gemini perfects. It is square Neptune within a few degrees. It's interesting that it's taking place at or on the same day that Mercury stations direct. But so let's think about this. Full moon in Gemini. Well, this is lighting up our communication and mental curiosity and our ability to think with great mental fluidity. And I would say there's also something here about the conflict between the thinking logical mind, which would be Mercury, ruler of Gemini, and the more belief-oriented, sort of right-brained part of the mind, which would be Jupiter, the ruler of Sagittarius, as here we have the moon in Gemini opposite the sun in Sagittarius, forming the full moon in Gemini. And I think that is made even more the case by the fact that, indeed, the full moon is square to Neptune. So the whole sun-moon axis is square to Neptune, the planet of confusion and illusion, the conflict between logic and intuition, or reason and emotion, between facts and beliefs. This is very much, from what I can see, connected with this. And again, we have to consider that Saturn Neptune midpoint, which is still at about, if I do some quick math, 20 degrees of Pisces here. If you really want to be technical about it, it's more like 20 Pisces and 30-ish minutes or whatever, but about 20 of Pisces. This full moon is closely square that. So again, the challenge of discerning reality, Saturn, from illusion, Neptune, very much connected here, as it was connected with the Mercury retrograde. I mean, this theme is all over this month of December, interestingly enough. It's like we're all really trying to figure out just what the hell is really going on, and do we believe what appears to be true or what feels like it is true? Do we believe what we're being told? Can we even trust that we have enough information to logically discern things, or do we not? Do we not know what to believe? It's a very interesting dynamic how this keeps coming up. And also, going right along with that, as mentioned earlier, Mercury stations direct on this same day, and you can see it right there. By 4 p.m. Eastern Time, Mercury is direct in Sagittarius. And the good news is this should help bring some level of clarity to things with the Mercury retrograde concluding. It is also worth noting that it stations direct in a close trine with Mars. So that's interesting. Something about a breakthrough involving our mind and our willingness to take action, acting on something that has to do with our mental perceptions of things, or again, it could even be travel and pushing forward in that way. So Mercury stationing direct in a trine with Mars is almost like, let's really push forward and make something happen. However, what's also very interesting about that is Mercury was retrograding back towards the perfecting or the perfection of the trine with Mars. Mars previously itself was moving towards a trine with Mercury when it was still direct. And so for a little bit there, I think they were, in fact, mutually applying when Mercury was retrograde and Mars was still direct. Yes, indeed, they were. But the trine never actually perfects, or at least the next Mercury-Mars trine won't be for quite a long time from now. So the implication or suggestion with that is that right around this time, December 15th, as Mercury stations direct, it might look like something is just about to happen, some kind of a mental and or action-oriented breakthrough is just about to occur, but then it doesn't. And all of a sudden, it just recedes. And that could catch a lot of people off guard, especially on the heels of that full moon square confusing Neptune. So it's like on December 15th, things are not what they seem. On December 18th, we have the Sun square Neptune. So this is activating the stress of trying to, again, discern what is real. This is our conscious mind or ego or sense of self bumping up against the illusion and confusion of Neptune. And so December 18th is not a good day to try to do something that is very logical or requiring of clear and objective thinking. It is a much better day for creativity, fantasy, taking some time out of your busy schedule to watch a movie or play a video game or escape into a good book or something like that. It is not a good day to do your taxes. Not to say it's necessarily a bad thing. A lot of times these aspects to Neptune, even the hard aspects, I find can be a particularly dreamy and almost magical day as long as you are careful not to take things too far, as long as you don't get so lost in fantasy or illusion that you never come back to reality. On December 19th, speaking of more nice or pleasant aspects, we have Venus trine Jupiter. So the two benefics, Venus and Jupiter, are making a harmonious trine to one another. This can facilitate a lot of positive breakthroughs that is very exciting to look forward to. Venus, the planet of love and relationships and feelings and desire, is harmonizing well with Jupiter, the planet of growth and expansion and knowledge and good fortune in general. So I would look to Thursday, December 19th as a day where some very pleasant breakthroughs can manifest indeed. On December 21st, we have the Sun entering Capricorn. Thus, it is the winter solstice and Capricorn season begins. So, as the Sun enters Capricorn, we're leaving behind that Sagittarian vision and kind of dream for the future and that forward-looking optimism, and entering something that is much more earthy and reality oriented. And I think it's all the more appropriate that we have a lot of the holidays taking place during Capricorn season, particularly Christmas and New Year's, because with Capricorn energy, there's this sense of the reality of time, especially being ruled by Saturn, which is all about time and limitation, and the reality of going from one year to the next. As this year we go from 2024 to 2025. There's something so fitting about that taking place during Capricorn season. And it is, of course, the first day of winter in the northern hemisphere. And so it's time for that actual official winter cycle to begin. So for a lot of people, during Sagittarius season, it already starts to feel like winter, which is appropriate because that's a mutable sign. Well, it is during Capricorn season that we officially, truly begin winter, and we experience the death part of the cycle in nature, or the, how do I put it? The clearing away of all that has been, so that eventually something new can grow in the spring. And so we see that we see the theme of death first in Scorpio season as things are dying. Then Sagittarius season is a transition period after that. And then by Capricorn season, they're just dead. So there you have it. Not to get too dark or anything, but this is a dark time of the year. That's what it is. On December 24th, Christmas Eve, we have the perfecting of the Jupiter-Saturn square again. So this is the retrograde hit of Jupiter to Saturn. They've been mutually applying for some time now because Jupiter has been retrograde while Saturn has been direct. Again, with this being a retrograde hit, this is likely to manifest as something far more internalized rather than a physical outer event, though there may be physical outer events that are representative of it. Regardless of how it manifests, it is stirring up that energy that we went over earlier of something in one area of our lives is growing or trying to grow or expand, but it's bumping up against limitations and maybe even causing problems in another area of our lives, whereas the former is represented by Jupiter and the latter is represented by Saturn. And so that can be a bit of a struggle that we all must go through and experience at this time. But I think the key is to find a way to allow that Jupiterian growth to take place in whatever area of your life that it needs to, while also not letting it get out of control to the point that it pushes past those Saturnian limits. because it may be tempting to think of, with Saturn being a malefic, that those limits are bad or unwanted in some way, but a lot of times those limits are there for a reason. If you have uncontrolled growth, well, that could threaten eventually everything. So at some point, it has to be kept in check by Saturn. But if Saturn becomes too strong and you just have limitation everywhere and no growth, then things become stagnant and collapse in that way. So it's this constant interplay of these Jupiter and Saturn energies that actually keeps life going in the way that it does. And again, it may sound cliche, but it really is true. Balance, or perhaps a better word yet would be integration, is the key. So in other words, maybe you're trying to maybe you're trying to expand your mind and learn a lot. That would be appropriate for Jupiter in Gemini in general. But maybe that's bumping up against, but maybe you're finding yourself learning so much and getting excited about so much that it's distracting you from your work and responsibilities, which would be a Saturn thing. So it is not to say that you should not continue learning or growing at all. No, you absolutely should. But in that scenario, you want to try to limit it in some way so that it doesn't threaten your overall stability or your work or your responsibilities. Or you could just say fuck it and try to say the hell with any limits or responsibilities. Let yourself grow uncontrollably, and then life itself will teach you why that is not a good idea. Oh, and I just also kind of want to mention, with it being Christmas Eve, I think it's kind of funny because, like, for those celebrating that holiday, you have the Jupiter theme of gift giving with the Saturn theme of tradition and the reality of time and even the reality of tradition, like with holidays like Christmas, and kind of the stress of that interplay. And then that brings up the whole thing of, like, well, is Christmas supposed to be more about the Jupiterian gift giving or the Saturnian tradition? And well, maybe the astrology this year in particular is reminding us that maybe it's about both. Maybe it should be about both. I don't know. That's up to you to decide. But the astrology is certainly pitting those two areas against each other very notably this year. And speaking of Christmas, on December 25th, this is the astrology. Now, nothing that I would normally note actually takes place on Christmas, December 25th, but I just thought I would include it since there might be a lot of people who are curious just what the overall mood or energy of that day will be like this year. Well, in particular, we do have the moon square the Mars-Pluto opposition, but also sextile the sun. So let's go over this. The moon is here in Scorpio, giving the background mood of the day, giving a kind of deep, dark, passionate, intense, perhaps intensely emotional background mood of the day. Made all the more so by the fact that it is square the ongoing Mars-Pluto opposition, so it may be stirring up some things in that area, all that is deep, dark, and powerful. That might sound like a bit of a, I don't know, unfortunate thing for Christmas Day, but then you have to also notice that the moon is sextile the sun, which creates nice, supportive, harmonious energy. So there's something about, so it's the moon in Scorpio and the sun in Capricorn. The Capricornian grounding of that intense Scorpio feeling or emotion. So the sun in Capricorn is like our conscious mind or conscious awareness that is more grounded, and it's in a supportive aspect with our emotions or mood represented by the moon, which might be a bit more stirred up by this Mars-Pluto square. But the sun in Capricorn should help to stabilize that. Now, of course, this is all up to every one of us, how we use this energy. So it may manifest better for some than others, or more preferred for some than others. But I would also point out the Mars opposite Pluto doesn't necessarily have to be an oh so bad thing if one knows how to work with that energy really well. I mean, if you work with the Plutonic energy of transformation and you know how to focus your action and motivation productively rather than just getting all fearful and paranoid, I think that this can be a quite advantageous and transformative opportunity, although admittedly a much more challenging one than other aspects would give us. So that's the energy of Christmas Day. It's an intense Christmas, I'll put it that way. Not bad, just intense. So I feel like, again, that moon-sun sextile really is the saving grace. On December 26th, we have Mercury opposite Jupiter and then square Saturn just after midnight. So here it is, Mercury opposite Jupiter. This is another one of those three-part events due to Mercury's recent retrograde, and this is the third and final part of that particular event. Again, Mercury opposite Jupiter. Our mind is challenged to expand or grow in ways that may be difficult. And the fact that it locks right into that Jupiter-Saturn square just emphasizes that even more. In other words, not only now is our mind being challenged to expand or grow in ways that may be difficult, but it's also somehow activating or triggering that part of our life in a longer term sense right now that is expanding in ways that may be difficult or challenging due to the square to Saturn. Now, as far as the Mercury-Saturn square goes, again, as mentioned, as I animate the chart here, that doesn't technically perfect until after midnight the following day, just after 2 a.m. Eastern time. But basically, you can be pretty certain that that's going to be felt all day on the 26th, because look at how close it's already getting, and the Jupiter aspect is also just focusing it that much more into being. And so Mercury square Saturn, the stress of our mind bumping up against hard limitations or realities, communication difficulties, having to tell someone no or being told no yourself, travel limitations, especially with the opposition to Jupiter as well. That would be doubly significant, travel limitations, mental stress, having to take care of something involving perhaps even technology that is not the easiest or most fun thing, but it has to be done. Maybe your 100th phone needs fixed or something. There's all kinds of possibilities, but basically involving our mind, communication, travel, or even technology bumping up against limitations or hard realities and dealing with the stress of that. But it's tied in with the opposition to Jupiter for Mercury and the Jupiter-Saturn square as well, which is very interesting. And if you really want to be technical about it, I meant to mention this earlier with the Mercury Cazimi, but as it locked into the same Jupiter-Saturn square, but with this forming a T-square, it pushes us all into the Virgo part of our charts. So whatever house or houses, depending on the house system you use, that part of your chart represents, know that will be activated at this time as well, in such a way that the T-square energy is pushing you into that part of your life. And it's interesting to consider that that is also ruled by Mercury. So that Virgo part of your life, whichever house it is for you, it's ruled by Mercury, or at least the sign is ruled by Mercury, and depending on what house system you use, it might be ruled by something else. And the whole sign house system I use, it would also, of course, be ruled by that Mercury. So it's all that much more connected with Mercury things: communication, short distance travel, technology, mental activity, reading, writing, studying, speaking, all this stuff. On December 28th, we have Venus square Uranus. Okay. You can see it right there. This is shaking up our love, relationships, feelings, and desires, and often in a stressful or destabilizing way. When Venus comes into a square with Uranus, expect the unexpected when it comes to not just your relationships, but any area of your life involving beauty or aesthetic appeal or creativity, connection with others, and indeed relationships of all kinds, and not just romantic relationships. And just like I feel like so often with Venus square Uranus, the shaking up of desire, the wanting something different, and or the manifestation of something that is new and different, especially related to other people, related to fun and creativity, and indeed feelings and desires. So yeah, December 28th should be a very interesting day when it comes to our relationships and feelings. It's going to be a significant disturbance, but not necessarily a bad disturbance or unwanted disturbance. It can very often be something that is fun and maybe a bit stressful and unexpected, but it can be the idea also of a pleasant surprise. But it'll be different for everyone. For some people, it will be wanted. For other people, it will be unwanted. On December 30th, we have the new moon in Capricorn. And why don't I go ahead and animate the chart a bit here and zero in on it, get it closer. Okay, looks like right around maybe 5:30-ish p.m. Okay, yeah, just before 5:30 p.m. Eastern time, we'll have the perfecting of the new moon in Capricorn. So here we are yet again. We end where we began this month with another new moon. So from the Sagittarius new moon to now the Capricorn new moon. Now, this new moon is interesting because it's not really aspecting anything, at least not closely by degree. So we look more then at the energy of the new moon itself, which again is in Capricorn, and suggests that the next month or 4 weeks, this coming lunar cycle, is going to have this background mood or tone of what is very real and practical and disciplined and hardworking. And again, I would emphasize the reality of time and tradition. And we notice, of course, that the lunation ruler, Saturn, is here in Pisces. And again, still being squared by Jupiter. That whole Jupiter-Saturn square is an ongoing thing. And so there could also be something about the energy of, oh boy, psychic perceptions, sensitivity, and maybe even forgiveness and letting go that makes its way into the background energy that we are now moving into, the seed that is being planted here with this Capricorn new moon. And I would say that that may be even more so the case when we note that really, even though it's not close enough to show up as an aspect on screen, there is a building, applying sextile between this new moon and its ruler, Saturn in Pisces. It's just about 5 degrees away. And yes, that's a bit wide, but I think it still counts, at least in some cases, and or at least to some extent. And so that's the only other thing I could say about that is that is likely quite fortunate in that it provides that Saturnian support and stability, which we're going to need all the stability we can get at this time, I think, navigating these energies, especially that ongoing Mars-Pluto opposition that is just putting us to the test in so many different ways, and calling on us to have a far greater and much higher energy output in different areas, multiple different areas of our lives right now. And I think at a time like this, we could use all the stability and structure that we can get to help us navigate this insanity. On December 31st, again, this is a day that I wouldn't necessarily include in a monthly context, but I think a lot of people might be curious what the energy of New Year's Eve is like, so here we are. As mentioned earlier, though, we have the Mercury Chiron trine perfecting. So here's the third and final event with that ongoing story on New Year's Eve. But I also wanted to point out that the moon conjoins Pluto opposite Mars early the following morning. And the reason this is significant, and I'm including it even though it's technically in January, and this is a forecast for December, is because as the moon swoops in and activates the ongoing Mars-Pluto opposition at this time, that's some very stressful energy. And I can just imagine so many people out on New Year's Eve partying and having fun, which I'm all for that, but like taking it too far and then regretting it the next morning when this very brutal energy is activated by the moon Pluto to Mars opposition, the moon conjunct Pluto Mars opposition. That will kind of be at its peak, I'd say, yeah, right around 8 a.m., maybe into 9 a.m., though 9 a.m. the moon's just past Mars, but just the whole following morning. So my advice here is have fun on New Year's Eve, but be careful not to have a little too much fun, because otherwise you might pay for it the following day. And of course, that moon activation of the Mars-Pluto opposition is going to manifest one way or another anyway, but it doesn't hurt to, I think it is extraordinarily wise to look at what the astrology has to say and know that this is a time in particular where you don't want to push your luck. And the other thing that I would mention in connection with that, though, that's interesting is look at how it locks into the nodal axis with the moon Pluto sextile the north node trine the south node, and Mars sextile the south node and trine the north node, and even partile right down to the same degree, 1 degree of each of these signs. And so that implies, most befitting of New Year's Eve developments for so many people, the connection and interconnection of like people and experiences from different times and places, with the nodes being like portals or vortices into other times and places, you know, connecting us in this way, and can also speak of rather fateful developments. And so that is what we have, the energy of New Year's Eve. Have fun, but be careful is the basic message there. And that is it for this forecast. I hope you enjoyed watching. I don't have too many concluding remarks to make because I think we went over things quite thoroughly. It is a very dynamic month yet again. It is, like I mentioned earlier, not a time where we are necessarily likely to make a lot of forward movement because we have these retrogrades that are slowing us down and kind of forcing us to review and reassess and redo things. And that will continue to be a theme, although we do at least now have Mercury direct and Neptune direct by the end of the month. So there is perhaps some forward movement, but, you know, we still have the Mars retrograde to deal with and the Jupiter retrograde. It's almost like by the end of the month, maybe we're starting to make some additional progress, starting to feel like we're getting back on track and excited for the new beginning of a whole new year. But make no mistake about it, there are some areas where things are just going to continue to unravel in a very fixed, and I almost want to say, for those who might be experiencing it more negatively, stagnant way. We're just not done with that Jupiter Saturn square work or the Mars opposite Pluto work. In fact, especially with the Mars opposite Pluto, this has just begun. If you are thinking like so many of, I don't know, what can we call them, trendy types, with this idea of a new year, new me, well, you may be able to have a new you on some level, but not quite entirely yet. There is more work to be done in figuring out how to keep our growth in check without limiting it too much, and also how to continue handling this intense effort indicated by the Mars-Pluto opposition in whatever area or areas of our lives, without being overwhelmed by the pressure to transform, as indicated by Pluto. So I think it'll be very interesting once we're a couple months down the road from here, because I think that's when we're really going to see how the stuff that is happening now ends up affecting us in the future, or what are the actual results or consequences of the activity that we have going on right now. So especially as we get into March and April and May, I think we're going to have a much more clear perspective. So that's basically it. That's where we are. It is one hell of a holding pattern, but there is also much excitement going on at the same time. So that is my forecast for December of 2024. Thanks again for watching, and have a great December of 2024.